every no is a better yes. So I just started going for what I wanted, that right there. And that's how, sometimes, God just wants you to trust him. And God
Yes.
just wants you to realize that it's always a lesson. And how you choose to react to this lesson is what the outcome would be. If you remain optimistic in chaos and confusion, then it's going to be a blessing at the end.
We are going to be talking about Black women in leadership, diversity, equity, and inclusion corporate strategies. Welcome, TaQuonda.
Thank you, Tamaria. Thank you. And it's a pleasure to have you, to be available to speak with you on your platform.
You're welcome. Well, I'm excited to have you here. So, we're just going to jump right in. And the first question I always like to ask all of my guests is, if you were to meet someone for the first time, who would you say TaQuonda Hill is?
Whew. TaQuonda Hill is a thriving thought leader. She's a mother, she's a wife. She's one that, has a strong desire to enact change and leave a legacy in this world.
Amazing. And in terms of your life and how you got to where you are, can you tell us a little bit about your journey in corporate America and how you transitioned into the various roles that you have been able to make it into and be able to excel and thrive in so many different ways in your career?
Certainly. My story, I would definitely say, is one of resilience. I had a lot of no's in my career corporate journey. And when I say that is, I've had the pleasure to excel to where I am right now, but it required a lot of pivoting, a lot of lateral moves, a lot of building my own plan as to, where I wanted to be. And, just the backstory, I like to tell the story of, my first, real corporate, and I won't say the company, but my first real corporate job. And I'll be honest, I learned a lot. I spent 13 years there. Would never really, I really appreciate the grooming that took place while I was there, but there was a lot of lessons. A lot of lessons of constantly, having to work harder. In that particular environment, you always had to, be one step ahead or one step better. So what I did was I formed my own plan. I don't recommend this, but I got my undergrad degree, went to go work for this company. I had a baby my junior year of college. So it was go to law school or get a job. I decided I need to get a job because Corey has to eat. So from there, I got a job, started working there. And, through happenstance, I just built a somewhat of a career through there. I got into first exposure of leadership, but also what I wanted to do. I knew what I saw for me, and that was to be a corporate executive woman. I hooked onto that from the beginning. There was a woman that I seen at my first job at the bank. I cannot think of her name, but what I can tell you is she always had on a suit, and her hair was blonde. And every time I seen her, she had a notepad. And she also, I sat in a couple of her trainings, and something about her aura, how she carried herself, it just impressed me. And I told myself internally, I'm gonna be her one day. So
I
from
love it.
there, I knew I didn't have a plan. In corporate America, unfortunately, as a Black woman, you don't always get tapped on the shoulder with a mentor to sponsor you, to groom you. So you do some things on your own. And what I did was, and I don't recommend this, but it's part of my story, is I went back to school, accumulated a whole bunch of loans. I was like, okay, I'm gonna get a master's degree so they can't tell me no. So that positioned me a little bit. It allowed me to get into that leadership door. But even within that, there were still opportunities that I felt that I was ready for, but for whatever reason, I was always being told, no, well, you have to do this or you don't have to do that. So what do? I go get another master's degree. At this point, and I think it's important that I share this. It's very transparent, but I look at it now about 100,000 in debt plus of degrees. I kept feeling like I had to prove myself
Mm.
or be more than. And I know everyone hears that I had to be more than qualified, more than what my other counterparts who probably just had a bachelor's degree and a good mentor from the start, from the time they walked in the door. They didn't have to go through those things, but for me, I had to build my own plan. And what I did was, I just kept educating myself, accumulating more debt, taking lateral moves in order to be in a position. I told myself, you're never going to be able to tell me no. So
Right.
from that, energy, that is pretty much, the start of my corporate career journey. It was trial error, being told no. And then I, started telling myself, every no is a better yes. So I just started going for what I wanted. But, I wouldn't recommend my daughter to do the same, but it was a lesson. It was a good life lesson, and it helped me to catapult my career my way,
Right.
not the traditional way, but it was my way. And it allowed me to take a lot of lessons and sharpen my toolkit. So that's pretty much how I got to where I am right now.
I love that. And thank you for your transparency and sharing because that is so true. And so many people, they see you when you make it, but they don't see, like you said, all of the no's that you had to hear and all of the different things you may have had to endure throughout your career just to get to the same place that others may have been given,
Mhm.
essentially. So when you think about resilience and you talk about how you were able to continue to press forward, what gave you the strength to keep going?
um, and I don't want to sound cliche, but I knew failure was not an option for me. I also knew that I wanted to succeed. I saw the life that I wanted, and I went after that. I also, I also attribute that to, my mom. My mom raised strong women. She had three girls, and she was tough. I had a mom that wasn't my best friend. So it was just like, okay, you have a baby, you got to make it. You can't go back home and you don't have a trust fund. So therefore, you don't have an option. And not only that, my mom also showed us nice things. So with that, I knew I wanted a home. I knew that I wanted a nice life for my kids. So as far as tenacity, it was that spirit of I can't fail. I'm not gonna fail. And then
Right.
that view or image of what I saw of what I wanted. Number one, from the lady that in my bank job, that I'm like, okay, she's a boss and I want to be just like her. It was the suits for me. She was fly. It was a suit. That was one. And then the other was, at that point, at the beginning of my career, I had a child, and success was something that I wanted, and it was something inside of me, and I said I wasn't going to stop until I got there, and I channeled my nose to go harder.
Yes. And you know what? You have always inspired me. I remember the days of working together and just seeing your tenacity. And you know my story with my nose as well. But just know that I want to thank you for always encouraging me and also for being a good example of what it means to boss up. So no matter what people say, no matter how many no's, and you said it earlier, that means if there's a no, there's a better yes. And I remember just the day that I found out that you would be moving on to another opportunity. And I was so excited for you. And I remember saying, that means God is walking around. My blessing is coming soon because I was just so thrilled. But you are a great example as well. So the woman that you saw in the suit, you are also the woman in the suit for so many other women who are wondering, how am I going to keep pushing forward? How can I break the glass ceiling? So on this platform, I just want to thank you for being who you are because you have also inspired my journey in a lot of ways. You have no idea. I literally remember that day. I remember that moment. I remember how I felt. And I knew that, you know what, you always encouraged me and you were like, better is coming for you as well. So I want to personally thank you.
Thank
I'm
you.
going to give you your rose now, boo.
Well, thank you. And I want to give that back to you because I know our conversations. I remember us sitting in them cubes, and, it was, we can say it, it was a CU, continuing unit. We was
Yes.
all striving to get that one position, not realizing God had better for us. And that if we could
Amen.
just take, everything that he was showing us, all those no's, all those, so and so got the job, but you didn't. And then, I remember us saying, wow, is that what they told you? As far as, why you didn't get the job? And both
Exactly.
of us was like, they really don't have no excuse. But, as we all look, in hindsight, it's just okay, that was our then position. That wasn't what God had for us to stay. He wanted us
Amen.
to experience it and move on. And maybe it took one of us moving on first. And then if you notice, we all just moved
We
on.
did.
And, we're all of us that I can think of that, collectively that I still staying engaged with, we're all doing great things. But those experience, it almost seemed like that was going to be our forever point. The
Right.
way in which we were reacting. I know I cried a couple times. I
Oh,
know
I've
many.
cried. Well, I've cried plenty.
And it was just like, God was just, sharpening us, and we were
Yes.
sharpening each other. And at that moment, I still remember, and it was scary for me because I'll be honest, I had a child. So
Right.
that was my safety blanket. But when I tell you, when I left that company and went to my next job, I couldn't believe the money that they were offering. I couldn't believe the world that was outside of those walls because I was just so focused on that right there. And that's how, sometimes, God just wants you to trust him, and God
Yes.
just wants you to realize that it's always a lesson. And how you choose to react to this lesson is what the outcome would be. If you remain optimistic in chaos and confusion, then it's going to be a blessing at the end.
It sure will. And you are a testament to that. Like you said, we all are, because we were able to keep going. Um, and speaking of which, what role has faith played in your journey overall throughout the years?
Hmm. I tell you, it's this one scripture. Now, I'm a Christian, but I don't know all the scriptures, but I know one scripture, and that's trust in the Lord with all my heart. Lean not to my own understanding, and acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. I hooked on to that in some of the darkest times of my life. I hooked on to that scripture, and I'm like, if you know one, you can get through
Amen.
so many. So God plays a major role in my life. And I just believe, I have faith. I do doubt because I'm human, but I
Right.
have faith. And as I'm getting older, I'm 40 now, I can actually say I'm grown now. Uh, with that comes patience and being able to really step back, look at your lessons, and try not to repeat, the mistakes you've made over again, but find the lesson in that, put it in your toolkit, and share it so that you can constantly evolve and be better. So I would say faith plays a major role in my life. Having patience, being humble. I think,
Yes.
I consider myself to be very humble. I also consider myself to be a servant, and I definitely is very intentional about giving back. I think that's really important. I guess I know another scripture: to whom much is given, much is required. I hold that
Yes.
very dear to my chest because God has truly blessed me with all the things, and I don't know if I've shared my story too much, but, coming from a teenage mom, my mom had me either 15 or 16, one of them. She was a teenager. And my dad was murdered before he was 21 years old.
Mm.
So, not to mention I experienced a lot of death, growing up in the area that I live, with a close uncle of mine being murdered as well. So I've seen a lot, went through a lot. And if you really look at the odds, TaQuonda, of my story, I'm not supposed to be where I'm at, and I know that's no one but God.
Wow, that's so powerful. And to your point, a lot of times people may not know, all of the details, and we never know what people have experienced. And and the unfortunate thing is sometimes people, especially in corporate America and just in life in general, it's the crabs in a barrel syndrome, unfortunately. And people want what they don't have, but they don't know what you went through to get to where you are. So thank you for your transparency, and sorry, that you had to go through that, because I can only imagine how tough that was for you.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. And the fact that you mentioned resilience, like you are resilient. So, what advice would you give to someone who might be going through a tough time and they can't really see their way through at this particular point?
I would say, never give up hope, and use your story or whatever you're going to be your fuel to not give up, to keep going, to know that it's better. Oftentimes we soak in our situations and we stay there, but God is telling us to get up, because if you get up, you'll be able to reach someone else. And there's always hope, especially young girls. I mean, in these times, and I'm sure you probably know, a lot of them are experiencing, even sadly, more difficult times than what I've just shared. There
Yeah.
are individuals that's living in some very, critical, serious situations right now, but there's always hope. And that's where I feel like it's my responsibility, other like-minded women like yourself responsibility to reach down and to help. That's why mentoring is very dear to my heart, because I didn't have a mentor. I had to try to figure this thing out by myself. And I wouldn't say it was the best route, but I will say, I'm successful now in what I do. But if we have been in those shoes of adversity and things of such, if we can just touch one, we're making a difference. And because in corporate America, it's not many of us that look like us,
Right.
that's in the room. So it's a lonely road to success. There's someone had shared that. I read something about and it's a quote or something about how lonely it gets when you're trying to get to the top. That's a true saying, and that's in
It
any
is.
industry, especially as you talk about Black women in leadership in fields such as IT, where a lot of times you're the only one in the room, you're the only voice, you're sizing yourself up, because that little person on the shoulder is saying, are you even supposed to be here, are you good enough? And then you find out that you got all the tools within you, and those lessons, they only made you strong. Being
Right.
born to a single mother, and experiencing the murder of your father and loss, and not living, I wouldn't say we were poor, but you know lower economic constraints or
Right.
whatever. A lot of that stuff makes you question, am I supposed to be here? You see what I'm
Mm.
saying? So, but once you get to that point and you start getting in the room and you realize I'm more than qualified, just my life experience alone has
Amen.
taught me and made me more strategic than you could ever be. My
It's
life
so
was
true.
so
Chess, not checkers.
exactly. I told someone recently, I'm like, strategy better than a Black woman. I'm sorry. We strategizing from the time we come out of our parents' womb all the way up in time, all the way up and all the way through up. So we own the word strategy. They try to use it against us, but we actually
Right.
own
You need to be more strategic.
exactly. That is it, right?
Like, what does that mean? How
But
specifically do I need to be more strategic?
exactly. But yeah, so definitely, I'd say giving back and making sure we're reaching down, and we're bringing other women along is very important to me.
I love that. So, speaking of bringing other women along, and we're talking about moving the needle and really how companies can be more diverse and have more equity and inclusion, what are some of the strategies that you recommend to help companies and also to help individuals move that needle and really value their employees and be able to see, like you said, the strategy, or actually even be able to understand the benefits of having diverse perspectives in the room and at the table?
Yes. Wow. So it's so much. But the first thing I would definitely say is we have to keep talking about it. We have to be transparent, with ourselves as well as with our leadership teams. If you are in a position to hire, you have to be willing as Black women to bring along other women. Representation is key. But more importantly than ever is we have to get more disruptive. We have to call it out. If we're sitting there and we see that, it's the same faces, there's not diversity, at the table, we have to call it out and we have to question why. We have to start having those tough conversations. We have to start looking at the candidate pools, because statistics show that African American women are the highest educated race at this point. We hold more master's degrees than any other race. So it's not a qualification issue anymore. It's really the behaviors in which we hire our hiring practices. So therefore, I would say if you're in position to hire, then you need to hold yourself accountable, and you need to start asking questions. And then also, as you get further along at that senior leadership level, we need to start calling it out. Because to your point, if
Yes.
we're not if we're not having a diverse perspective, and we're used to seeing just white men at the table, or even now, brown people at the table, saying that we're diverse, and that there's no one else that looks like you, there's not a Tamiria, there's not a TaQuonda, then we want to ask why. Because the answer is not qualifications and we couldn't find anyone. That excuse is no longer relevant. So we need to start asking the difficult conversation, and we need to disrupt. And when I say disrupt, it's no different than get into some good trouble. We need to start disrupting behaviors that have been accepted and tolerated, and start challenging that in a good way, to say there are candidates out here. Why aren't we hiring? Why doesn't anyone look like me but me in this room?
That is a great point. Wow. You said a lot, and they are very important points. And I think when we think about history and we even think about how things that we've seen and experienced, a lot of times I think people are afraid to disrupt. So it's like technology. When Steve Jobs and Bill Gates started talking about the technologies that they thought of way back when, it was disruptive, but because people didn't understand it, it took them a while to grasp on. And there's so many things now, so many things throughout history that African Americans have created that disrupted history, but oftentimes that disruption gets covered.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like you wonder, do people really hear? And I guess my question is, how do you ensure that when we are disrupting those spaces and we're having those conversations, that it goes beyond that room or beyond that individual? Because I know you and I both, we've had conversations in different places, and asked really good questions, but sometimes it doesn't go beyond that because everyone's not ready for that level of disruption.
Right.
If you follow where I'm going with that, it's like it's it's great. I think we should definitely have the conversation, but how do we push past the conversation to the change? It's like right now, I feel like there's so many diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations, um, and there's statements being made, but is the change happening behind the scenes? Is the
Right.
payroll being evaluated? Are the same benefits being provided?
Right.
For instance, relocation. Are
Mm-hmm.
we giving the same benefits to everyone? And student debt. Are we providing the same tuition reimbursement assistance? So, all of these things, what do you think we can do to move it beyond the conversation as well? So, one, to get them to listen, and then two, to get the change or the ball rolling as it relates to change.
Right. The great point. Great point. And we recently had this discussion within my company. Is it a moment or a movement? And we want a
Ooh,
movement, because with a movement, then we are organizing around it. We are putting true strategies together that we can execute against actions. So really tying your strategic initiative to your business, whether it's your business OKRs or your KPIs, that's where you hold individuals accountable. And again, to your point, oftentimes, you can raise it, you can be disruptive, but how do you know that? Can you measure it? Can you see it? So that's where, where no one can really, and this is what I struggle with a little bit is, you know your diversity issues. Everyone comes with different diversity issues. We know that. That's clear. You have our LGBTQ community
Right.
that's dear to their heart. You have women in leadership that's there. You have black African Americans. That's
Right.
another issue. Then there's a span of them. But
Right.
what you have to do is you can't boil the ocean with everything. So you have to, find out what the big rocks are within your organization. And even if it's some quick wins, meaning if representation is your issue, then organize and put some strategies around representation, whether that's in our hiring practices. If we see trends, do we need to have auditing? Do we need to have measures? Do we need to have step goals on, who we hiring? Do we need to develop a sponsorship program to close the gap in representation? Those are some meaningful, quick, actionable items that we can do. Now, you raise a good point as far as pay. That is one where, that may, if we're being honest, that may take a little time.
Right.
However, as women and as educated women, I like to say, we need to be accountable and start owning our careers. There's this thing out
Yes.
there called Google. If you go online, you know what salaries are out there that are comparable. And we need to stop shying away from salary discussions. I'm going to just go on
That's
record to
a
say
really great
white
point.
men talk about how much money they want to make. As Black women, we feel like we take just what they give us. No, 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 no. To your point, when you're negotiating a salary, ask about that relocation. Ask about helping to pay my house off because they do that too. Ask about student loan. We are going to have to educate ourselves because if we're waiting for them to do some huge corporate initiative to change all of our salaries equal to everyone else, I personally think it does not happen. It will not happen probably in our time. Maybe in our daughter's time it will,
Exactly.
but if we want to talk about the now, we're going to have to start getting comfortable, even within our community, as African American women, to call each other. Hey, Tamaria, I just got a job offer. They're trying to offer me 150,000. Do you think that's reasonable? We
Right.
shy away from that, but I will tell you, Bill, he's calling Fred, and he's going to say, Fred, so and so offered me 150,000. Was that reasonable? What else should I, ask for? We don't do
That
that.
is so true.
We don't do that. We shy away from those conversations, and I believe they know, we kind of shy because we always questioning whether we're good enough. But we've already removed the barrier of education. We can compete. We have a competitive advantage in education, so we should
Right.
be going after it all: the payroll, the salary, the relocation, the stock options. All of it is comparable to where you are. Now, again, that depends on where you are in your career. As
Right.
you're moving up the higher levels, your overall compensation package, you have more reach, you have more things to negotiate. If you're entry level, you might not have as much reach, but you do have your friend Google to look at what they're
That's true.
hiring at the next company across from you to do a comparison.
You bring up a lot of great points. And it reminds me of what you said earlier about one breaking down that barrier of not thinking that you belong in the room or at the table. Because even for me, I will admit I have been nervous in my career to ask for what I think I deserve. And I found that I will, if I find out later on that I'm underpaid, that's when I'm like, oh, I deserve more. But it's not like I go in the door
Right.
feeling like I deserve more, knowing what I bring to the table. So I think that is a struggle for a lot of people, especially like women in general. I think it's a struggle because we, based on history, and what we feel about ourselves, or maybe experiences, or being told no, or being told, you don't have the qualifications, or you don't have the skills, or whatever we've been told, we start to internalize. And after a while, you start to believe it. But to your point earlier, we have to be willing to break that barrier. Once we break that barrier, and I remember you telling me a long time ago, You have to get to the point where they cannot tell you no. So you helped me in a lot of ways again, because you know what I did? I did go back to school because every job I looked at required me to have a certain level of education. And I said, well, education will not stop me. Now
Yeah.
what's next? Experience will not stop me. And I promise you that came from you, because I remember our many conversations, and you encouraged me, and you said, don't let them tell you no. You check the box before you apply,
Mhm.
so that it's impossible for them to tell us no again. And so I remember that, and literally from that day forward, and I remember the year, it was 2011.
Mhm.
I started checking off my boxes, and I said, the same way that we need to get education in order to get to the next level, I'm going to use this time to get the experience, because I need that as well. So I thank you. And you're right. We should be having the conversations and doing the work. So hats off. What is one personal affirmation that you live by?
You are more than enough. I
I
mean,
love
and
that.
I'm reading it as more than enough, destined for greatness. The one recently that I actually put the sticky here, fulfilled, unleashed risk taker who lives on purpose. I
I
read this
love
every
it.
day.
I love it. That's awesome. And one thing that I did not get a chance to mention earlier that I would definitely love to mention now is that TaQuonda is also one of four co-founders of the Fortitude Collective. So hopefully one day in the future, I'll be able to interview the wonderful ladies of the Fortitude Collective. They recently hosted a event, and I'd love for TaQuonda to tell us more about the Fortitude Collective, and also the types of events that they will be sponsoring to really help empower the community and mentor women.
Sure, definitely. So the Fortitude Collective came about. One of the founders, it was a phone call. It was a conversation where, one of the founders, she called and was like, hey, I really want to put together a conference. And, I feel like, we should get a group of women to see if, to speak about, the things that we go through. And, we started having some phone calls. And one of the founders, we were kind of stuck on, just talking about how showing up in the room and being prepared and knowing that you have the tools, but still trying to question whether or not you should be there. And then we all kind of hooked on the I brought my chair. And I brought my chair is really, it's a battle cry for women who have a seat at the table to say, I brought my chair. Even if they didn't invite you, I brought it. And when I show up ready, able to deliver, and empowered. So that's sort of our platform.
I
We
love
had
it.
our first conference virtual during the pandemic, and we had a little over 100 women show up, which was very exciting. We're in the process now of starting our planning season. We did our conference in February. We're actually going to be doing another one this February 2022, which should be in
Nice.
person. And we're also looking to do more podcasts. But our goal is to bring a army of women that's ready and equipped, that's willing to bring other women along to show that we're here, and we're bringing our chairs, and we're bringing our chairs ready and equipped to own every space that we occupy.
Oh, that's beautiful. That just, oh, I love it. And the way that you said it just gave me chills. I'm like, okay, yes, yes, Fortitude Collective. And I love the name. So I am really excited to hear more about what you all are doing, and to be able to support you all in any way that I can to get the word out. So before we wrap up tonight's show, I do want you to share with our guests how they can get in contact with you, and also how they can connect with the Fortitude Collective.
Sure. So I'll start with the Fortitude Collective. We do have Instagram. It's at the Fortitude Collective. .com. So that's one of our social media handles. We also have a Facebook handle where it's Fortitude Collective. So definitely, we do need to do a little bit better with posting, but we're working on operationalizing our brand so that we can have more of that. But that is one way that you can reach us. And then as far as myself, TaQuonda TaQuonda Hill. I keep it simple. I go by my full name. It's a story behind that. I'll share that later. But if you just my IG handle is at Quan at TaQuonda Hill. You can find me on Instagram as well as Facebook.
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank you so much for your time tonight. And I know that this will be a blessing for our listeners. I know this has been a blessing for me and a good reminder to keep going no matter what challenges we may face because we belong in the room as well. And I think once we remove that barrier, the sky is the limit. So I just thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come on and encourage our listeners wherever they are and whoever they are, that no matter what life has dealt them, that they can continue to move forward, they can continue to elevate and find purpose and meaning and be able to give back. So I just appreciate you. So thank you.
Thank you.
And on that note, good people, have a blessed evening. Good night.